better never ends. In health, in performance, no matter your starting point, you can always strive for better. My name's Charlie Goodchild, I'm your host, and this is the Better Never Ends podcast. We've made it our mission to share with you the expertise and wisdom of role models and leading experts in their field, teaching us about how we can be better, telling stories about their journey to better, and inspiring you to discover yours. Today we're welcoming Danny Lai. He's a functional medicine nutritionist. And some of you may not know what that term means because it's a relatively new term in the world of medicine and healthcare. The functional medicine side of things is emerging, I would say, and for good reasons. And hopefully by the end of the conversation today, you'll get an idea as to why we think it's so important and such a great chat to have. So Danny started life out as a PT, and through a journey he's going to explain himself, has ended up specializing into functional medicine nutrition, and even more niching into the area of diabetes. But we've got a lot more to talk about than just diabetes today, and even just functional medicine. And this is one of the more excited I've been for a podcast, because these are topics I've been deeply researching myself over the past year or two. And these are areas that I think are becoming increasingly important for understanding not just our health in the next year or two, but our health in future decades. And this is something that Peter Attia in his book Outlive and in his podcast has been very passionate about putting forward, so that we think of a whole new era of medicine and healthcare. So we went through one era where we didn't really know what we were doing at all, and then the germ theory came through and we understood how to beat disease and bacteria to some extent in the short term. So diseases from infections and viruses, significant, and deaths from these things significantly reduced. And now we're starting to understand how to help the four horsemen, as he calls them, but in particular it's Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and these are the things that we're really trying to look to be more proactive with in our health. So before I get too deep on this conversation without letting you talk, Danny, why don't you come in and tell our audience a bit about you, and firstly who you are, what you do, and then how you got to be a functional medicine nutritionist.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just a regular boy from Northwest London, absolutely obsessed with football growing up, like lots of boys growing up in England trying to make it as a footballer. My football journey started pretty young. I guess I flirted between a little bit of professional and semi-professional football. Went to America to study, to become a sort of college student athlete, as they call it. Didn't quite catch my lucky break. And then, as with a lot of sort of failed footballers, they end up finding their way into the fitness industry. So I became a personal trainer. And then I guess a couple of years in, I got really, really sort of interested and passionate about body transformations. So helping clients with fat loss and muscle building, and, obviously improving strength and fitness through strength training mainly. And then I guess I was introduced to a way of, assessing body fat using skin fold calipers. It was called biosignature modulation, pioneered by the late Charles Poliquin, who was a world-renowned strength coach. And through his sort of systems of tracking and assessing body fat, he kind of postulated that there were certain, biochemical and physiological aspects of the body that correlated with body fat storage in different parts of the body. And I guess that was my first sort of introduction to functional medicine and looking, quote unquote, under the hood. I'm a lifelong eczema sufferer as well. And so I guess it became it was quite a natural sort of progression for me to dive deeper into some of the areas that I was talking about, gut health and inflammation and probiotics. Personal training background, and more recently, qualified as a functional medicine nutritionist. And I guess my two sort of main areas of interest are cardiometabolic health and digestive health, and very much more recently in type 2 diabetes.
And if we just try and go a bit more specific on what does a functional medicine practitioner do? What's the difference between that and some other areas, some other specialisms? So you obviously got your background in health and fitness. What is the difference there? What are they looking for?
Well, I guess if you asked sort of 5 different functional medicine nutritionists, you might get 5 different answers. But I think the one thing that they would always come back to is, trying to find root cause. The people that we're seeing, the conditions that we're seeing are generally chronic. And so typically speaking, they would have sort of gone through the conventional way of sort of medicine, which is to go and see a GP who would have probably prescribed some form of medication to try and get them to feel better instantly.
The symptom,
absolutely. But then what generally happens is it gets better for a little while, it comes back, and then it becomes chronic. And then at some point, they'll often ask themselves, why am I not getting better? Why does this keep coming back? And so I guess with functional medicine, it's, taking the time with the client, and I mean somewhere between 60 to 120 minutes initially, just to understand that person, from the way that they were born to their upbringings to, everything in between, the family history, their current sort of state, diet, nutrition, everything. So we're really trying to understand that person and really trying to understand what was that sort of trigger, that triggering moment that's sort of set off this cascade of imbalances, and that sort of led you to where you are at the moment.
So I guess you're trying to be a detective about why the body is functioning the way it's functioning, and then it's looking at those different systems within the body and the history of the person to try and come up with a theory. And what are the sorts of tests that you might do in order to try and prove or disprove that theory?
Yeah, so functional testing is quite big, but I always sort of like to preface that with, where are your foundational blocks of health first and foremost? You kind of also almost need to earn the right to do functional testing. If you're not sleeping well, if you're stressed out of your mind, if your nutrition is poor, if you're not moving well, all of those sort of bigger rocks needs to be addressed first. Unless there's like a real sort of need to test initially. Testing kind of for me is, it's useful, but they are expensive, and I'd only sort of suggest a test if I felt that there was absolutely a clinical need for it. But a full blood panel, it could be like a metabolic panel, it could be stool testing, stuff like that. So those are generally the ones that I would use the most.
And then once you've got the answers to that, what's the kind of conversation look like with your client as to where you go with the information? One of the reasons I'm asking this is because to me, data can be a really powerful behavior change motivator. That's, even as a physio, that's some of the reasons why I might test someone's strength or measure their flexibility. They may or may not know that those things are a problem, but you then match them up against some normative data or even just my own experience of what I think people should be. And that can be quite powerful in order to get someone to engage with a plan. So, right, okay, so I'm weak or I'm stiff, I'm tight. Now I understand why you're asking me to do these things. And then I say, we're going to retest it. And then that gives them a bit of accountability. So is there an element of that goes on in your world that you think the testing can sometimes help with?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think one of the best examples is, metabolic syndrome, which is to have metabolic syndrome, let's call it, you need to sort of present with 3 of the 5 following sort of criteria, and which is, one of them is having an elevated waist circumference, one of them is having elevated fasting glucose. But, think about how many people, out there have an elevated waist circumference. But if they were told, or if they saw for themselves that, you actually have a high fasting glucose or you have high cholesterol, I think those sort of, we're data driven, are we? So it generally sort of hits home a little bit harder.
Yeah, and I think that's really what we're trying to achieve as healthcare practitioners is behavior change, right? So if we've got different tools in our box we can use, then that's where we're trying to go with it. If you've got that data then in front of you, you've got the person. I guess what I might come back to actually is you mentioned that you wouldn't always use testing because what's the reason why you might not use testing then? Is it, and you're saying there because there's almost sometimes more obvious things they need to focus on before you go down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just, generally speaking, 9 times out of 10, it's lifestyle driven, right? Absolutely, there's a big sort of genetical component to it, but a lot of the times it's lifestyle driven. So it's looking at where you are right now. looking at what are the biggest holes we need to fill. And testing can sort of, I guess, give us that sort of confirmation or reassurance that that is what we need to sort of focus on. But, like I say, there are much, much bigger things to focus on initially from a lifestyle point of view and address before sort of testing, I guess.
And I see you as quite a dynamic practitioner, actually. I see you quite often. So you work, I didn't mention this, actually. You work here at Until Central London. And I see you sometimes with your clients on the gym floor coaching. Seems like you haven't lost fully that PT background of yours, and you're still quite passionate about getting hands-on, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's my bread and butter, isn't it? Yeah. So strength training, cardio as well. And I think that just ties in so well with metabolic health, right? Because, you could diet, which we'll speak about in a moment, but, exercise is such a big component of, just general metabolic health. So it's a massive box that needs to be ticked.
Yeah, so let's go. Let's start with that then. If we're talking about exercise, then for someone who either wants to maintain their metabolic health or needs to improve it because it's a problem, what does exercise do for your metabolic health?
But I guess there's two sort of arms to this, right? You've got the strength training component, and then you've got the cardio side, and they're both working on your health in different ways, but I guess equally important. So you often get that question of, what should I do, cardio or weights? And the answer is both, if you obviously have time and luxury to do so. From a strength training point of view, it's obviously working on lean mass, and lean mass is and obviously grip strength is one of the biggest predictors for longevity. We are naturally going to be declining our lean mass levels per decade. And so the idea is that, once you want to set your levels pretty high in your 30s and in your 40s, knowing that it will gradually decline even with weight training, so that when you approach your 60s and 70s, you're not flat bottom, right? Yeah. And
disability, essentially.
Disability, yeah. and obviously with that means then that your bone density is going to be at an appropriate, optimal place. And so I always like to sort of suggest this to my clients, which is, falling over in your elderly years is one of the biggest sort of predictors of dying, right? And so what you want to do in your 60s and 70s is, if you did fall over, you just literally just pick yourself up and dust yourself off.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to, that should be the norm.
Yeah, you want to be robust enough and resilient enough from those kind of incidents to be able to bounce and then physically absorb the force of the fall and be strong enough of bone and tissue to not damage and break. Yeah. And then be independent enough to get yourself from the floor up again. Is that what you're getting at?
Absolutely. And then with the strength training, the older I get, the more I'm trying to include more dynamic movements and more lateral movements and more sort of single leg stuff, because
stability,
you're working on balance, right? Which is one thing that generally is going to decline again as you get older. From a cardio point of view, I guess you are working on your cardiovascular system, and you're working on your, it obviously is a great way to support weight management because it tends to be a little bit more calorific in terms of expenditure. But I guess
I just want to stop you on the word choice there, because I think it's actually important. Weight management. Yeah. Why did you choose weight management rather than weight loss?
Because in my early PT years, it was all about weight loss.
So exercise is the way you lose weight, right? You burn calories. So it's kind of that calorie.
Right.
Okay.
But if you pulled 10 people off the street who had attempted weight loss before, you might get one person, two people that have been able to keep the weight off. So generally speaking, as a nation, globally, I don't think we've got like a weight loss issue. People generally know how to lose weight. People don't know how to keep it off. It's so much harder. And so a big part of that is sort of reframing the psychology behind your health journey. And it needs to be more of a mature, zoomed out look at your journey. And I think the weight management, that simple sort of change in word, means a whole, is very, very sort of profound.
Yeah, there's almost that bit that I've heard a lot about now as well about diet. Are we dieting or are we just always on a diet? Because essentially the diet is the thing that we eat on a regular basis. So that's the argument there as well, isn't it? So what are you doing here? Are you trying to aggressively lose weight really fast, or are you choosing a diet that's going to help sustain your weight management forever? That I'm sure we'll come to some more details there as well. So, but I'm glad that we came back to that point, because my understanding is that the best way to lose weight is through diet change. Best way to keep weight off is through including exercise. And that sounds like it kind of backs up your theory there of weight management, and that both are actually important, just for slightly different reasons.
Yeah, like one of the also other sort of great sayings I like is, the only day you started a diet is the day you were born, and the only day you stop a diet is the day you die.
Yeah.
And so when we're thinking about moving away from weight loss to weight management, it just needs to be 100% inclusive.
Yeah.
It needs to be inclusive. It needs to be flexible. It needs to factor in your personal circumstances, your lifestyle, which is a lot of the work that I do with my clients.
Yeah, great. We're definitely going to come back to that, because I think that's going to be quite a big topic we talk about. One of the things I do want to just come back to before we get too far away from it is grip strength. Now, you kind of mentioned it quite flippantly, but what's going on there? Because I know about this data, and I've known about it for years. It's not new data. Why is grip strength so powerful and so predictive of so many health outcomes?
I'm going to be quoting Peter Attia here now. He's the one that sort of brought this to our attention, which is grip strength along with lean mass or skeletal mass, as well as VO2 max, are our biggest predictors of longevity, because it takes into account the accumulative work that you've done. For example, somebody having a good sort of lipid profile, so if their cholesterol levels are good, if their triglyceride levels are good, on paper looks fine. But what if that individual has literally just gone through sort of 10 years of lipid lowering therapies, or statins? So they've already gone through a period of having high cholesterol, and that will obviously have been very damaging to their structure. And so on paper, that looks fine, right? But we know that you've gone through, again, this period of time where you've been suboptimal. Whereas having a high grip strength and lean mass, there's no hiding that. You have to put in the work over time to be able to present with a good grip strength / lean mass. And it's the same with VO2 max. You can't just show up, rock up one day and have a good VO2 max, right? You've got to work for it. And it's that sort of accumulation of work over a time period that enables you to have those things.
And as much as all of those things make total sense to me, I'm not sure I've heard it framed that way. I really like that, because it goes back to my introduction, actually, that sure, doctors can help stop you dying medically in the short term with lipid lowering medications and therapies, but a doctor can't give you a tablet to improve your grip strength, your VO2 max, and your lean body mass. You have to work at that, which shows again the shift in our mentality now towards trying to improve your health in the future decades of your life, and not in the future months of your life or days or weeks. Healthcare medicine 3.0, different way of looking at it, proactive. I think it was right at the start of this the Outlive book, actually, where he speaks about a metaphor for this, which is we keep taking people out the river to try and stop them drowning at the bottom, and trying to save people at the bottom of the river. Why don't we go up to the top of the river and find out why people are falling in the first place? Yeah. And that's what we're doing here. We're trying to come up with some strategies, some ideas, and some ways of thinking that help people think about how to optimize their health in the future to stop them ending up in the river in the first place. Yeah. So I'm enjoying this. Yeah, you're already living up to my expectations and understanding. So this is good stuff. All right. So we've then got some ideas around exercise and grip strength, and my understanding as well. It's just, no matter how many times they try and test other things, it seems to be the most reliable proxy marker for overall body mass, muscle mass, and strength. Therefore, it seems to work really easy to apply.
You can also do things like 1 rep max testing, but with obviously a lot of people, that's not very appropriate from day one. So you could sort of scale that back and do 5 rep max testing, but obviously the grip strength test is just so easy to do.
Yeah, and from what I understand, those rep max tests are still not superior.
Yeah.
So therefore, if they're not superior, then if we're thinking of longevity in particular, then grip strength seems to be an absolute no-brainer, doesn't it? So what's yours out of interest? Do you know it?
I don't know, actually.
Yeah, we'll have to test you after. I've got one in the outside. Yeah. Maybe we'll add it to our stories.
Definitely.
We'll do your grip strength at the end of the session. We'll have a grip strength off. Okay. Let's go back to some of the things that really inspired you to change your career. You know, the thing that really shifted you from being a PT into caring more about functional medicine, and the sort of rabbit holes that you went down that got you really interested in the biology and what happens within the body. What happened around that?
Well, I guess over years, you know, there was a point where I just saw more and more clients who showed up with weight loss goals, but then also had other health issues at the same time. So it might be, I want to lose weight, but I also have digestive issues. I want to lose weight, but I seem to have these sort of hormonal issues. And so that kind of, I guess, opened up my eyes in terms of, hang on here, you know, there's so much more happening in the body than just, you know, a calorie deficit. And, you know, as you get older, you know, the aesthetics driven weight loss goals mean less and less to you, or I certainly did for myself. And so I think it was just a natural progression of just getting a little bit older, getting a little bit more mature, and seeing that people were actually suffering with, you know, I guess more important health issues. And for me, those sort of being able to sort those issues out became a little bit more rewarding, I would say.
Yeah.
With PCOS being a big example of that type of person I'm referring to, which is they have weight loss driven goals, but something hormonally just isn't right that is really, really giving them a hard time to achieve it.
That's polycystic ovary syndrome.
Polycystic ovarian syndrome. So yeah, I guess that just led me down to a rabbit hole in terms of trying to understand mechanisms a lot more.
You mentioned about calipers being your primary early way of measuring body composition, and then has that changed and has that evolved over time? Because I know that a DEXA scanner being potentially gold standard has been as using it for body composition. Where's your thinking now gone with body composition? Where do you sit?
So yeah, skin-fold calipers are used for many, many years. But definitely have sort of drifted away from using them. First thing I'm going to say is that all sort of body fat measuring devices, machines, scales, they all have their pros and cons. So it's not that one is superior, it's just, you know, the time and place for it. Skin-fold calipers are very, very useful in terms of just being able to repeat it very, very often. If you get a good practitioner, it's generally pretty consistent. But the biggest drawback is that it's only looking at subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that's under the skin, the fat that you can sort of pinch and grab, which is generally a lot safer. And we'll talk about this a lot more when we talk about moving to diabetes. But so that's one end of the spectrum.
So that almost seems like for aesthetics, in like I want a six pack on the beach kind of viewpoint, calipers might be fine, because actually that helps you with the visual fat, the stuff you can see on the surface.
Yes, and it's not to say that, you know, people with health-driven outcomes can't use skin-fold calipers, because at the end of the day, we're just looking for a trend, right? So if an obese person is losing weight and they're moving into a more sort of normal BMI using skin-fold calipers, then you definitely are improving your health parameters as well. It's just that it's not giving you that sort of deeper look into things like visceral fat, which we know is that one thing that, you know, in terms of body composition and metabolic health, is that one thing that we need to be quite aggressive with.
So visceral fat being the fat that surrounds the organs?
The fat that surrounds the organs, not just surrounds the organs, but actually builds up inside the organs, which is the number one sort of root cause of big metabolic disturbances.
And if you've got low visceral fat, high subcutaneous fat, you can be actually metabolically healthy.
Absolutely.
And if you've got the other way around, low subcutaneous fat but high visceral fat, you can then be metabolically quite unhealthy.
Absolutely. And this is one of the
skinny fat.
Skinny fat, and also this is the big part, the part where genetics come in to play. somebody might have a lower threshold to store fat subcutaneously, and they'll have a lower threshold to store fat subcutaneously, and they have a higher propensity to store fat viscerally.
Why does that happen? So do they know?
I don't know.
Yeah, so there's just something going on with certain people, and I guess, this makes, even just looking around in society, you see people all different shapes. You do see some people who are just a bit bigger in general, and you see some other people who are very big in the middle of their body, right around their organs, essentially. I guess the beer belly kind of concept is the one that jumps out at me. Is there maybe, so is that just purely random genetics, or is there actually a way of a lifestyle factor that might predict whether you are more likely to store visceral fat versus not?
I'm not sure, to be honest. The only thing I do know is that there are certain sort of heritages that and ethnicities that tend to fall into this sort of category a lot more. So, Africans, South Asians, they generally sort of have a harder time in terms of they have a lower threshold storing fat subcutaneously, and that's why the type 2 diabetes sort of prevalence is so high in these populations.
Does the visceral fat come first that you know of? Is it the kind of first biomarker, I guess, that, or is there other things that are going on that are a bit earlier? So I'm more thinking of the person who's really health conscious, a bit younger, and they're looking to optimize their health. They're thinking, right, yeah, I want to get involved in this medicine 3.0. What do you think their early signs might be that they are someone who might struggle to store fat subcutaneously and then more at risk of visceral fat storage?
Well, I think it's important to say that this exists on a spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got full-blown type 2 diabetes, where you've got such a huge buildup of fats in most of your organs, muscle, liver, pancreas. And the other end of the spectrum is just a milder sort of disturbance in terms of glucose disposal. And I guess one of the earliest sort of indicators of that would be either having a high fasting glucose or having a high 2-hour postprandial glucose. So
2 hours after you've eaten.
2 hours after you've eaten, how elevated are your glucose levels? Because usually in a normal healthy person, glucose levels would drop back down pretty quickly. So if it's staying elevated, then that suggests you've got insulin resistance in your muscles, in your skeletal muscles, and they're having a hard time bringing glucose out of the blood and depositing it into the muscles.
So this brings us actually quite nicely into glucose monitoring in some way or another. Yeah. So we're talking here about that person who's just trying to understand their body in a different way. They're not necessarily full-blown symptomatic. They might have some functional disturbances, perhaps. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're just general feeling of fatigue, low energy. But let's consider they're broadly healthy. What are your thoughts around continuous glucose monitoring, which is something that's become more in the public domain? We can get these devices now relatively cheaply and start measuring. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so obviously popularized by several programs and several influencers who will remain nameless in this podcast. Yeah. But I think most people know who I'm talking about. I think generally understanding blood fats, blood glucose for the public is always going to be a net positive, simply because we know that those two things are so correlated with metabolic health. The issue is that most of the time people have a very, very hard time understanding what to do with that data, understanding cutoff points. And, with social media so much in our faces these days, things are just being blown out of proportion. So this essentially stems from the public's sort of poor understanding of the development of type 2 diabetes, because you're a type 2 diabetic is told you have high glucose levels reflected by a high HbA1c. And so we want to put two and two together and say, okay, well, I don't want high blood glucose levels. And what raises my blood glucose levels the most? Carbohydrates. But the issue is that the development of the disease isn't happening because you're overeating on brown bread and couscous and quinoa and sweet potato, right? it's happening because of underlying mechanisms, which we're happy to get into. But okay, so it stems from energy toxicity. So energy toxicity being in a chronic state of energy excess, meaning you're overeating, you're not moving enough. And this leads to weight gain and predominantly fat gain. And this is when we start seeing fat build up in your major metabolic organs. So you've got fat build up in the skeletal muscle, what we call intramuscular fat. And that basically sends off a cascade of, again, just muscles not being able to pull glucose into the cells very well.
Is this one of the other reasons why strength training can be really valuable for people to improve their metabolic health?
Yeah, absolutely, because your skeletal muscles are becoming more insulin sensitive. They're also not relying on insulin to pull glucose out of the cells. When you're contracting muscles, you're using a different sort of glucose transporter that doesn't require insulin. So it's doing a positive without even pulling insulin out of the pancreas, and therefore, I guess, not overworking the pancreas.
So you get more of a sponge for any potential excess.
Yeah. So you got insulin resistance in the skeletal muscles via buildup of fats in the muscles. You then get a buildup of fats in the liver. And one of the key jobs of the liver, people know the liver as this sort of master organ for detoxification, which it is, but it also is the master regulator of your glucose levels. So when you're sleeping, your liver is just constantly pumping out a little bit of glucose to keep you alive. And when you have a buildup of fats in the liver and the liver becomes insulin resistant, it doesn't stop. It just continues to pump out glucose into the blood. So then you've got a buildup of glucose in the blood, which is called hypoglycemia, which then signals the pancreas to continue to push insulin out to try and bring glucose into the cells. So then you've got, I guess, peripheral insulin resistance in the muscle, in the liver. You could also get insulin resistance in your fat cells. And then you also get this sort of development of beta cell failure in the pancreas. The beta cells are the main sort of cells in the pancreas because they're constantly having to release insulin into circulation to try and bring blood glucose levels down.
So they just get tired, essentially. They just get overworked.
They get tired, and that when that happens, you're type 2 diabetic, to be honest.
And what's the main trigger there then? So insulin's obviously part of it. Glucose within the blood's a part of it. I just heard someone recently talking a lot about insulin itself being one of the problems, and one of the problems that within the body causes the problem, rather than the glucose being the main demon here. It's like sometimes insulin actually was suggested to be part of that too. Is there anything in that?
They're both the problem,
okay.
But when you zoom out, you realize that the problem is driven by an excess of calories.
The behavior. The behavior of overconsumption or under use of the calories.
Yeah. So, the more insulin gets pushed out, the more the pancreas is starting to get overworked. If you've got insulin resistance in the liver, in the muscles, you are not able to bring glucose levels back down, which leads to hypoglycemia in the blood. And then this just sets off a bit of a vicious cycle. So to go back to your point, which is, the main sort of cause of type 2 diabetes is that sort of just not moving enough, gaining weight, gaining fat, and fat builds up in all the wrong places. And this is where that visceral fat, which we talked about earlier, is causing the problem.
So we've decided now that visceral fat is important to measure, and therefore skin fold calipers become slightly less important for this thing that we're trying to measure. So then we move on to the difference between, I guess, a proxy measurement for things like waist circumference and versus bioimpedance versus DEXA. What are your thoughts on those things?
So DEXA is regarded as the gold standard of measuring body composition, but it still has its flaws. Mm-hmm. One being that whilst it's very, very good at looking at your fat mass and visceral fat, which we just mentioned, when it comes to the lean mass side, it's only looking at lean mass or fat-free mass. It doesn't actually differentiate. Well, for the listeners, lean mass or fat-free mass isn't the same as skeletal muscle mass. Skeletal muscle mass is within lean mass or fat-free mass, but your lean mass or fat-free mass also encompasses things like water and organs and fluids. So when it comes to actually tracking if somebody is losing skeletal muscle mass or not, DEXA isn't able to differentiate between that or not. Bioimpedance, on the other hand, does. It does give you that sort of look into your skeletal muscle mass, but it doesn't look at bone density. So you've got, sort of trade-offs depending on what's most important to you.
Because bioimpedance, how do these two things, how do they come up with their calculations in two different ways?
So DEXA is an X-ray. So you are being exposed to radiation, which is another point. It's not of any significant meaningful amounts, but it is an X-ray. Bioimpedance is sending an electrical current through the body. And it's basically sort of, the calculation is based on how, it is measuring the resistance when it hits certain tissues, essentially. So you've got your home scales, which you just stand on, and it's the accuracy of those probably not the best because it's only just sending an electrical current up through one leg and then down the other leg. So it's not really measuring your body fat levels or anything through sort of torso upwards. But there are other sort of more advanced analyzers. You've got your in-bodies, you've got your secors, where you are looking at sort of multi-frequency bioimpedance. So it does seem to sort of be able to track things throughout the whole body.
And there's once you get to the more expensive bioimpedance, the differences versus DEXA become smaller.
Yeah, I mean, I use SECA, and we've cross-referenced that with DEXA. And in terms of body fat percentage and body fat mass, it seems to be pretty in line.
Okay, so slightly cheaper, easier to get hold of as well for most people.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a trade-off because you don't get the bone density. But then, like you said, depending on the person in front of you, if they're 30, 40 years old, probably don't need to be that concerned about bone mass if you're doing all the right things, bone density.
Exactly.
But you get someone in their later decades and you might think, okay, actually now might be a time where we do want to see that. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And you could just, do a DEXA as a one-off and then go back to bioimpedance. So you can mix and match.
Most, yeah. We're going to track back again because you've said so many interesting things. I'm going to have to do this, I think. You've also mentioned about low carb. You kind of flippantly said it when you were describing what the body does with glucose. Tell us a bit about as a nutritionist here. What's your thoughts and your practice around a healthy diet for someone when considering the macros, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, those kind of things?
Yeah, I think this all stems from my experience working as a personal trainer, and in the sort of body transformation space, you tend to meet clients who have done something by themselves before, and it generally falls under, I guess, three camps. It's either I've cut out carbs, so I've gone low carb, I've cut out fat, so I've gone low fat, or I've done some intermittent fasting. And again, back to that point of, how sustainable are those practices? It's generally, I've lost weight, but then I put it back on. And so from a pretty sort of early age in my sort of career, I've always been quite hyper focused on that. So it's like, okay, you want to lose weight, but you've tried these different methods, these sort of conventional dietary models. You've seen some success, but it's never lasted. So for me, it's kind of like, well, we just need to find something for you that works and it's inclusive, right? So you don't feel too restricted. It, meets all of your demands in terms of energy, in terms of social calories. So for me, it was always a case of how can we build a diet for you that, is all encompassing, is completely balanced. So yeah, this is one of my bugbears when it comes to, the dietary advice that's given to especially type 2 diabetics from the NHS, from Western medicine, from conventional doctors, which is we want to suggest something to you that we know will work acutely in the short term. So low carb diets for type 2 diabetics, absolutely is going to work. But are you going to be able to keep that up for the long run?
So they're pulling people out of the river again, rather than going up to the top and trying to understand what caused in the first place.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I've worked with so many type 2 diabetics and helped them with remission whilst keeping carbohydrates in the diet. But it just requires a lot more time, a lot more coaching, a lot more personalization, which I guess the NHS doesn't have the luxury of.
Yeah, we've had this conversation in other ways before on this podcast, that it's not NHS bashing, it's just being realistic about what the NHS is for and what its strengths and weaknesses are. And its weaknesses are for long-term conditions, and that could be both injury, dietary, medical, whatever. But I agree that this is just our space. Our space is in those worlds, and therefore we can grab it and start to be more individualized and nuanced, and therefore we're more optimal towards someone's health, thinking about the future decades of their life. Now something you're also mentioning there, in fact, I really like the terminology social calories. So I've not heard it called that, but actually it immediately made me go, yeah, that's what we need. We can't stop people being social. Socializing is an absolutely crucial part of our health. It's not just we like to do it and it's nice. It's essential for our health. And a lot of our societal norms are based around calories, and some of those are alcoholic, some are not, and some of them are good, some of them are bad. But I think we just have to be realistic that it's not going to be anytime soon that culturally we're going to go teetotal. So is that kind of partly what you're doing, almost accepting there's an amount of noise in calorie terms, that there's going to be a day or so a week where you can almost let yourself go and enjoy that, provided you earn the right for that? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I never meet somebody who wants to lose weight that has gained their weight because they've eaten too much of the good stuff, too much of the whole foods, because they were too hungry. They've gained the weight because they've either eaten out too much and it's part of their lifestyle, or they've eaten too much to fill a void, whether that's emotional soothing patterns, comfort eating, being too close to the kitchen because of working from home. So when you realize that weight gain predominantly happens for reasons outside of pure physiological hunger, then you know where to look, you know where to address. With the inclusion of calories on menus, I think from early last year, we as personal trainers, as nutritionists, we kind of already knew that Sunday roast is going to be very, very calorific. But it's not until you actually see it for yourself, you then realize, whoa, this is actually big. And not just Sunday roast. I kid you not, I saw a side dish of broccoli at a pub. Guess how many calories it was?
Now I'm going to overestimate here because you've asked the question. So I'm going to go with 600 calories.
Almost 800.
Wow. That's and a broccoli.
And in hindsight, I should have ordered it just to see how they were tasted.
So tell me how that makes sense then, because I don't even know specifically, but what would broccoli just cooked without any extras, what would that have?
50.
So
100 maybe.
So that is 750 calories to a broccoli dish that's a side.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable. So I guess that's oils, cheeses. They put like some kind of cheese.
Probably, yeah. Cheeses, fats, oils, and then my lamb roast was pork belly. Sorry, pork belly was 2,400.
Wow, so more than your daily recommended allowance.
Yeah.
You're a slightly more muscular guy. You can probably get away with that, but for one meal.
That's your daily intake, right? In one meal.
So that's your social calorie.
That's your social calorie. So I guess the point is that, look, we know that socializing can't stop. We're social creatures, but it's just looking at, how much are you socializing? What is going to be a reasonable reduction for you? And then I guess it's just, setting expectations based off that.
Yeah, I was in a pub last Sunday with some friends socializing, and one of the desserts, I think it was a chocolate brownie, and one of my friends who's also very, very healthy, very muscular, very strong and fit, and he was, I might get the brownie, and he said he noticed it's 1,000 calories. It's like 1,000 calories for a brownie. He's like, no, I'm not getting that, and he got something else. Like, so actually, I guess in some ways it even if it's not everyone, it's informing choice for some people. Yes. I can believe it'd be that. And look, I've got another question actually to ask about. So I'm a healthy weight. I'm exercise generally relatively well, and I've just learned for me that a version of fasting does fit in my lifestyle. So I've always found it hard to eat breakfast. I've never been that hungry in breakfast, and I then found that fasting up to about lunchtime, I'm not that strict with it. It's a very loose fast. So I kind of eat 11:30, 12:30, my first meal, and then I'll have a later lunch / early dinner, and then I'll have another dinner. So I still eat 3 meals a day. I just end up eating it at different times to society, I guess. I would say my calories are a bit different as a result, maybe, but probably not hugely different. It just seems to work for my appetite. And I've since listening to Peter Attia, I now have a protein shake in the morning. 1 scoop whey protein most mornings, and that's just to try and make sure my protein intake is where I think it should be. What do you think on that? Because it seems to work for me. And my social calories don't change. I still eat whatever I want when I go out, and I'm just a bit more, I don't know, time restricted during the week.
Have you had any weight issues growing up?
No.
Absolutely fine.
Yeah, and
this is the biggest point, which is a lot of times people are moving to intermittent fasting as a way of weight loss and weight management without having the fundamental building blocks or foundations to really sort of push an advanced dietary model onto themselves.
Okay.
All right. Which is like, have you gone through a period of, eating whole foods, high protein, high fiber, high foods that rank highly on a satiety index? Have you got, external reasons and issues like stress and sleep management and workload and work-life balance and lifestyle that's going to be impacting your, I guess, energy intake? So for a person that's not had weight issues, for a person that's been active, it's pretty easy to take that next step, which is intermittent fasting. But for somebody that's always had issues with weight and yo-yo dieting, you just need to focus on the basics first.
Yeah, this almost, I'm just connecting another concept here of marginal gains versus maximal gains. A bit like in training when someone's focusing on the foam rolling rather than actually building up a cardio base and a strength base, for example. Or with sleep, they're changing their mattress instead of actually just going to bed and waking up at a similar time, for example. It sounds like that's what you're getting at, is that there's much bigger building blocks and much bigger maximal gains to focus on before you start worrying about your marginal gains.
But those smaller building blocks aren't sexy, and it's not exactly rocket science. So I've come up with a bit of a framework to help coach my clients, which is called the 6 M's model. And it's basically the what, the where, the why, the how much, the when part of your nutrition. So if you get those fundamentals right, you're pretty much there.
Could you give us a bit more detail about that? Because I think this is going to be really helpful for listeners to understand.
Yeah, so I always like to start with the first M, which is meal structure. And that is, when are you eating? Are you eating before you work out, after you work out? What time does lunch come? What time does your, how many snacks are you going to have? What time does dinner come? You want a structure to default to on a day-to-day basis, right? It's not to say that every day needs to look the same, but this is what you default to. We saw during lockdown how interrupted our lives got when we lost our structure, especially with children, right? So we always want the structure to default to. Meal composition is the second M. So this is more about your calories and your macros, like how much energy do you need? how many carbs do you need to support your energy demands, your training, your performance, etc. Protein intake obviously is a big one. The third M is meal options. So this is more about, what are you going to be eating? By the time I finish working for my clients, I want them to have a bank of meals, kind of like a meal library. So maybe 2 to 3 different breakfast options, 3 to 5 different lunch options, 5 to 7 different dinner options that they can just rotate between, that they enjoy, that they can cook, which fulfills their meal composition, so fulfills their energy and macro requirements. And that just kind of forms, 80 to 90% of that individual's diet.
I really like this because you're almost saying, let's take choice out of it and we'll just automate it. So you don't have to think, you just do. You just get into your routine and your habit. So it's no longer about having to say, oh, I've got to think about my food, I've got to do this, which is effortful, because a lot of the times you can essentially take effort out of it, buy a takeaway, or take effort out of it and just walk into a shop and buy something easy and quick. You're trying to get that same principle, but for healthy foods. So they get so into a routine that it's easy, like always buy the foods that help you to make up these options.
Yeah.
I think that's such a great way of doing it. I guess because I think about my health a fair bit and I have had to think about it in order to make it work. That's something that I've ended up realizing is that for some of my meals, I just need to make sure that every shop I've always got that available. So my first meal is breakfast, but actually it's lunch, as I said. And what it requires is that at home I have a big jar of mixed seeds. I have some oats. I've always got yogurt. I've always got some frozen fruits, a variety of frozen fruits in the freezer. I've got a pot of peanut butter, and I mix all that together again, and sometimes some kefir as well. And I mix all that together, and that gives me a really tasty but healthy start to my day. And if I miss out on some of those, I end up making a bad choice. I haven't got this. I'll just eat something else instead.
Yeah, people just need inspiration to what these meal options can be, right? And it's just like maybe taking a look at different recipes and then maybe scaling back in terms of the more complex ones and just trying to create a variation of a recipe that will work for you. The fourth M is meal portions. So this is the how much, the quantity of your meals. Meal flexibility is the fifth one. So this is more about, again, social calories. Where are you going to be eating? How much cooking are you going to be doing? And then lastly, mindful eating, which is, we could probably do a whole podcast on that. But essentially, why are you eating? Again, we got back to that point, which is nobody gains weight because they were too hungry. They gain weight because they're generally eating for I think there's 30 different reasons why we eat. Hunger is just one of them. So again, maybe that's to soothe an emotion, for comfort, to celebrate, to grieve, stress, all those other reasons. So I guess it's just being mindful about, what is your relationship with food like? Can you spot some triggers? And then obviously trying to put some easy strategies to try and help that individual.
Does someone ever need more in-depth psychological support with that? Because what you're touching on there is actually a lot of emotional triggers for eating, and I don't think it will be. I think there'll be plenty of people out there that go, "Yeah, that's me." So what? By the sounds of it, it's not just as simple as some of those other M's that you mentioned. There is a psychological driver to that. So how useful and how often might you refer to a specialist there?
Absolutely. But I think initially it's trying to work out how much deficits are we seeing in the other 5 M's, because getting those right generally will help with the last one, with mindful eating. And I guess it just depends on how deeply rooted that issue is. So I'm pretty clear in terms of setting my boundaries. I can absolutely help with pretty surface level suggestions and recommendations and tips. But if it seems to be a bit more of a chronic issue, then absolutely I'm going to refer out.
So you've now got the nutritional status fairly well under control, let's say, or at least you've got a good awareness of that. And we've spoken a fair bit about blood glucose here, and one of your other areas of interest and specialism is within gut health. So what kind of, we'll start us off. Why is gut health important for our overall health?
Wow.
Another entire podcast topic that you need to whittle down into one answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think the best way to bring this into one sentence is, if we think about how many gut cells there are, bacteria cells there are compared to human cells, I think they outnumber us, I think somewhere in the region of 10 to 1. So there are 10 times more bacteria cells than there are of you human cells. So automatically we have to acknowledge that they are vast in majority, and they seem to have a either direct or indirect impact to pretty much all aspects of your health. When you think about the bacteria, not just in your gut, but in your lungs, on your skin, in your mouth, so it plays a role in many areas of your health.
The fact that it's called the microbiome actually almost seems micro in size perhaps, but not in quantity. So, and I think many people now are starting to become aware that there's, well, in fact probably most people, that plenty of those bacteria are good. So what are we trying to do there from a nutritional perspective in order to improve the good, reduce the bad bacteria?
The first thing to look at is your fiber intake. Okay, so there's a rough recommendation of somewhere around 25 grams for females and then 30 grams for males, or it could be sort of 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories of intake. And what we see in the sort of, they call it the SAD diet, right? The standard American diet, is that it's nowhere near those levels. So the first thing to look at is where are your fiber intake levels? But it's also important to be quite careful in terms of how much you increase it by, right? Because
all at once. So yeah,
exactly.
One of the funny stats I heard about fiber is that within certain populations, one of the biggest amounts of fiber that people consume is actually coffee. so like you get a certain amount of fiber through drinking coffee. So people don't even get the minimum dose of fiber through any kind of real food other than coffee, which is absolutely mad.
So you want to look at just each meal being an opportunity for you to onboard some fiber, for the fiber to be, interacting with your bacteria, and that's what they love to feed off, right? And you kind of just want to make sure that the terrain of your gut microbiome is in favor of those bacteria that are going to be supporting you in terms of your health.
And the way that we essentially, to put it really simply from what I understand then, is that if you eat real foods, fruits and vegetables, then it's quite likely that you'll get the right type of fibers in to encourage the good bacteria.
Yeah, not only just fruits and veg, but complex carbs, so starches, nuts and seeds, that all of those. And then obviously we've got more of the fermented stuff, your kefirs, your sauerkrauts and that sort of stuff. They all help. So you just want to try and get as many of those sources in your diet throughout the week as possible. I think there's sort of 30 different plant sources in the week. I think there's a study that's been shown to, there's 30 different ones, and that includes herbs and spices as well. So
yeah, it's quite some way away from the 5 a day that was going on when I was a kid. But I think with the fact that you include those herbs, those spices, that makes it a bit easier to achieve the 30 a week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go from 5 a day to 30 a week. It sounds like a ginormous jump for most people. But I guess what you're coming back to your other point about, if you plan your meal structure and it's just a routine, you could almost choose the 30 that fits within those options, and then you're quite likely going to hit it without actually doing much conscious thought.
Yeah, it just takes some prerequisite planning and organizing, and then once you get into a routine, it seems to be pretty easy for most people.
Yeah, well, going back to my kind of breakfast feast, that includes nuts as well. I forgot, and that's like mixed nuts as well. So if I just use that example, I'm pretty sure there's between 10 and 15 within that, and that's half for the week, just by making that slightly difficult, initial outlay of like making sure I got it all at home, and then the rest of it's all automated and it's just done for me.
Yeah. So what is it again? What is the breakfast that you have?
So yogurt, kefir, nuts, mixed nuts. So it's probably maybe 5 or 6 different nuts. So we'll be on 7 seeds. There's maybe maybe 3 to 5 different seeds, all mixed in with that. So I'm already above 10. Mixed berries, strawberries, cherries, blueberries, blackberries. So actually, I'm doing myself a disservice here.
Right.
There's more than that. Peanut butter as well. So there's another one. So there's like 20 or so different plant sources just in that one. Pretty delicious, to be fair.
Yeah.
Breakfast. So mix all together, and it's really easy to do, and it takes me 3 minutes to prepare in the morning because it's all there in my house.
Sounds delicious.
What kind of other things might you be looking at regarding gut health then? And actually, sorry, we didn't quite get to the crux of it. So we've spoken about what we need to do to feed the good bacteria, but why does that matter? Why does it matter that we've got good healthy gut? What happens if or maybe a different question, what happens if we have an unhealthy gut?
Well, I think I don't want to come across as, there's gut health has become so popularized these days, and there's a lot of people on social media who aren't experts in this area, throwing out flippantly statements like, if you have a bad gut, then it would lead to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I think we're still very, very early in our sort of knowledge in terms of what does a good versus bad gut look like. But I think what I can speak to is seeing clients in clinic who are presenting with digestive symptoms, and the sort of common sort of trends that I see in those individuals. And that might mean, having a family history of, digestive symptoms. That might mean, having over sort of half a dozen courses of antibiotics throughout their lifetime. So there's different sort of elements of an individual's upbringing and genetics that I guess will sort of present somebody with a quote unquote bad gut, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And from what I understand, it seems that one of the implications is that bad gut health leads to systemic inflammation of some sort. Is that could you make that?
Yeah, I think there's I think what you're referring to is intestinal permeability.
The leaky gut.
The leaky gut, yeah. So these sort of tight junctions of the gut become separated. And just to be clear, they do separate for reasons that are healthy. For example, exercise.
Yeah.
Exercise is a stressor. It definitely does increase this sort of leaky gut in the at least acute stages. But I think it's this sort of chronic exposure to things that will sort of encourage a leaky gut. So intense exercise, it could be smoking, it could be drugs, it could be a variety of different things. And I think in a susceptible person, that might lead to sort of more autoimmune conditions because the immune system is just outside of the gut. And so what we find is, food particles that aren't being digested properly can sort of seep through into the bloodstream. And then that's when it sets off a cascade for the immune system to, go into hypervigilant mode.
Yes, then habitually the immune system is just on all the time.
Yeah.
Or just more on than it usually is all the time, which is that what
Yeah, the immune system is on, and that usually correlates to increased inflammation. And then that's when we tend to sort of see more systemic issues like rashes and brain fog and mental clarity disturbances and stuff like that. And
is this I know it's more complicated than this, but is that in essence the gut brain connection to? That's how those two things can be aligned, is that the leaky gut potentially triggers the immune response and the inflammation systemically, which can then have an impact on the way we experience.
Yeah, I think basically the gut and the brain are connected by the vagus nerve. Right, so it's a bidirectional sort of channel of communication. I'm certain that intestinal permeability and the associated inflammation can sort of seep upstream, and then we get this sort of crossing of the blood-brain barrier, which then increases inflammation in the brain. But like you said, I think it's a gross simplification of that process. I think there's so much that's going on in the brain that can impact the gut, hence gut feeling. I think we won't go too much deeper there, but even just the connection between gut health
our experience of the world, our brains functioning, our systemic functioning. Just the simplification is absolutely what we're looking to achieve for today's conversation, that actually it is more complicated than you might first believe, and that some of those symptoms that you didn't realize were related might be related. But if we just strip it back again to the things we've spoken about, a lot of those may well be solved through dietary changes, lifestyle changes, exercising with more consistency in the right way. So the simplification is both ways. It's that, of course, we can go down rabbit holes, all sorts of rabbit holes, and have people talking about the biology and the science and the chemistry behind that. But if we're just trying to give tips for the person listening, it kind of comes back to that. And as long as we can just give an idea that some of those choices that you can make can impact on lots of different ways of you, lots of different symptoms that you might be experiencing, then hopefully people can see the connection there between, and the value of making those slightly harder or maybe really hard in the short-term choices to therefore have better health in the long term.
Yeah, just cover your foundations: stress, sleep, exercise, nutrition. Probably also putting in their sort of purpose and like community and sort of emotional well-being.
Yeah. And look, to me, that stuff's magic. Like what you just said there is like the absolute epitome of what I really see works in my world too. But yeah, as you've hinted earlier, it's not sexy. It's not Instagram worthy all the time, but we're going to keep shouting about it because we believe that it's worth it. Danny, could you give us, just to finish off here, firstly, I ask everyone this. So what does Better Never Ends mean to you, either in your world personally or for your clients? It's obviously our podcast name, so I'm going to shoehorn it in. But what does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, there's probably the same sort of theme that comes out of most of your guests' mouth, which is, just self-development, isn't it? Self-development, self-improvement. For me, it's am I growing? I think I'm definitely a big, most of my books are non-fiction. A lot of my books are on self-development. And there was one, I can't remember the name, but there was one that asked me to rank my biggest values in life. And growing was one of them. So I've always been, assessing how I'm doing from year to year, from decade to decade. Not that I can look back too far in terms of decades, but, when I think back to, me at, 23 as opposed to 33, how far I've come. So it's all about growth, and in areas that potentially you don't want to step into. So yeah, that's for me. For my clients, it's again helping them see further down the line, because that's generally what they can't see, right? They can generally see what's quite in front of them. What does the next sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks look like? But through experience, I can sort of lend that sort of wisdom in terms of, no, this is what you want to be in 6 months' time, 12 months' time.
There was a Brené Brown book that went a lot through values. I don't know whether you've read any of her stuff or listened. Sure. She's fantastic if you're that way inclined. Brené Brown's work's good, but yeah, I went through some value. I was digging deep on my own values through her work. Look, thanks so much. And I guess finally, how could someone get in touch with you if they're interested in what you're saying, if they might want to come and work with you, or at least ask you some questions? What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can just reach me through Instagram. I'm the diabetes guy, or my website, which is dannylyhealth.com.
Thanks so much, Danny. Really, you lived up to my high expectations. So
I appreciate it. I really enjoyed that.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Better, provider of health, wellness and performance services based in central London. You can book in for face-to-face services at either of our 2 clinics, one in Soho and one in the city. You can also follow us on Instagram at Better Never Ends, or head over to our website for more information about the clinics or the podcast at www.betterneverends.com. And of course, if you want to send us an email with any feedback, questions or suggestions for future episodes, then email us on podcast@betterneverends.com. And finally, thanks to Brian Long for editing the show. Without him, it's absolutely no doubt in my mind that these would never have seen the light of day. And it will allow this podcast to continue on for as long as I'll keep recording them. So thanks very much, Brian.